that with Ukraine, they're going to be Russia is winning so hard right now that they have no alternative but to escalate, because they're going to come to him and say, look, we're losing so badly, you have to do something, you have to give them missiles, you have to do more on sanctions, you have to.
Good morning, Vietnam. No, good morning, Dubai. Good morning, and welcome to the Daily Energy Markets podcast. It is the 17th of November. It's 10:30, just gone 10:30 a.m. in the United Arab Emirates, which means it's very early where other people might be, and maybe not so for us here in the Gulf. But we've Brent crude oil opening this morning down 1%. Once again, seemingly more comfortable under $65 on Brent than above $65 on Brent. That seems to be the settling place for this particular current period of time. We spent a lot of the third quarter settling above 65. We've sort of spent much of the fourth quarter settling below. Omar Najia, derivatives trader, BB Energy. Is this where we're going to be for the rest of the year?
No, I don't think so. So you've seen a major sell-off. Well, you've seen a sell-off in everything. So people are always expecting things to go up in a straight line. So you've seen, tech stocks, AI, the S&P, NASDAQ, all that kind of Bitcoin. So I think, in terms of oil and oil prices, I think that, if you take a large
Does the Bitcoin sell-off tell you anything about the wider market? I mean, it's always been a bit of a reference from the sense of risk-on appetite.
Yeah, basically, I think it's just, following or leading the rest of the stuff. So you're coming into the middle of Q4. So people will be, quote unquote, booking profits. They don't want to take risk if they make money, all that kind of stuff, right? So it's normal, it's expected. But if you take a bird's eye view of oil, and not just today or what's going to happen this week or whatever, I think that the lows that we saw back in March, April, May, around whatever it was, $55 WTI, and probably like 59, 60, something like that, slightly below for Brent. Those lows, I think, are the lows that will be with us for an extended period of time. I don't see any possibility of, recession. I don't see any possibility that we're going to have a bear market in equities. None of that stuff. I think basically the thing that will trump everything is the spending.
And no pun intended, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the spending in the US, it's just going to be everything rises.
Everything rises into Santa Claus. What about Michelle Weiss-Bachmann, Senior Maritime Intelligence Analyst at Windward? Michelle, what is the crystal ball of all things marine intelligence telling us about the world and about particularly whether Russia is or is not having problems, starting to have problems, is having problems getting its oil on water to the rest of the world?
Well, good morning, Sean. Well, I have seen some evidence of what we would call stranded cargoes and difficulties in selling all their oil. For example, I was looking over the weekend at 6 sanctioned tankers that have berthed at Duqm in Sohar that are normally used for shipping oil to India. So we've definitely seen a change in patterns for Indian receiving cargoes. And the other development that I've seen, and it's a brand new trend, is that for the first time we've seen a reduction in Greek-owned vessels shipping Russian crude. So I've only seen one so far in November, and even through September and October, with the implementation of the lower oil price cap at 47.60, Greek-owned tankers have shipped about 19% of Russian crude. And so we've definitely seen that come back in November. So they're the nascent shifts of difficulties and perhaps a disruption while Russia tries to find new workarounds, new oil intermediaries, clean tonnage, and to.
Are you subscribing to the idea that this time is different? That this time, the US is serious, Trump is serious, and correspondingly, as a result, the customers are paying attention. The Indians, the ship owners, everybody's paying a bit more attention, believing, buying into that. There's no taco here. This time is serious, or is that also a mirage in the desert?
Well, I think, everyone's been saying the real test will be November 21 when these licenses expire. And certainly overnight was saying that the Republicans are working on legislation to impose sanctions on any country doing business with Russia. So there's plenty of saber rattling there. But I think everybody is just getting ready to get some clarification. What is a Rosneft-owned cargo? Is if it's gone through 3 or 4 oil intermediaries, does that still qualify as potentially a sanctioned cargo? And everybody's just getting ready, and just in case, I think. Is it a taco trade? We really don't know.
Omar El-Baidly, Director of Research at the Bahrain Center for Strategic International and Energy Studies. I mean, this is the year of the unpredictable. I mean, overnight, once again, Trump doing massive reversal on the Epstein files, fighting it vigorously against Congress releasing the Epstein documents that sort of are supposed to reveal who shot Kennedy and everything else. But ultimately, he's now saying, yeah, go ahead, do it. This reversal element of Trump, where does that fall in this region with MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the leader of Saudi Arabia, going to Washington this week? How much does he have to factor in what is real and what isn't real in terms of any deal he does with the reversal in King, Mr. Trump?
I think that these are two, separate files. I think, the relations with Saudi Arabia, these are part of a big geopolitical a game which most of the US public is desensitized and desensitized towards and disinterested in. And it's a completely different playing field, whereas the hoo-ha around the Epstein files is something regarding domestic, both within intra-signed conflict within the Republicans and within, among the US population. So I think that I think
just take that point. Just taking that point, Omar. How, as us mere mortals in the outer rims of the Roman Empire of Washington, should we be taking the Epstein things serious? Do they mean anything? Should we? I mean, given how significant they are in the US, should we pay any attention to them or just be entertained?
Well, I think that the reality is that if Trump is sanctioning their release, then there can't be anything particularly damning in there. Plus, I think there's been an effective strategy with the double about turns that you mentioned in terms of making everybody just fed up with them. That even if something mildly concerning does appear, enough people won't care and will want to move on. So I don't think, in answer to your question, I don't think it really matters anymore. There's been and there's probably more important things going on. Not to downplay, obviously, the gravity of what happened, but I think that if people are looking to use the Epstein files as a way to take down, large political whales, then I don't think that that's going to happen. But the political scene is an unpredictable one.
I mean, when you say that MBS going to Washington this week is in a separate corridor of belief and trust, I mean, one has to remember that during Trump 1, he left the Saudis out to dry on the back of the Abqaiq attacks, etc. Is there a different reality now? I mean, this is a big moment for Saudi Arabia, for MBS. First trip to Washington since those days of the first Trump administration.
Yeah, so I think that, if you're absolutely right about 2019, but there are several key differences between now and then. The first is that Saudi Arabia doesn't just want security guarantees. It also wants nuclear power, which reflects other important files which were not didn't have such a high priority then. So even if they don't agree on security deterrence, that is something they would potentially agree on. Secondly, the push to get Saudi Arabia to normalize with Israel in a sustainable way and to leave and to set up the Middle East in a way that doesn't require security intervention from the US is much more acute than it was from Trump's perspective than it was 8 years ago. And the conflict, the geopolitical conflict with China is a lot more salient. And so there's a much more impetus from the American side to get something done. Whereas the Saudi Arabians have been doing their homework, they're in a stronger position. They've made better relations with Iran since previously. They have this agreement with Pakistan, and they've also, maintained channels with all other superpowers. So I think that I don't think they'll reach the deal that Trump would like, but I do think they will continue to make incremental progress on other important files, which would be, mutually satisfactory.
Omar, looking at the available sort of capital liquidity that's come, I mean, you would think that the big institutional buyers and traders getting out of Bitcoin, getting out of gold in October, taking a lot of profit, and the sort of the hordes of sheep flooding into the ETFs on Bitcoin and so forth, getting burnt, is the usual narrative over the history of time. Latecomers to the punch bowl getting whacked. Where's all that money going, do you think? All of that profit taking from the big hitters on Bitcoin and gold and the equity markets. Does any of it see making its way into the commodity funds, the energy funds?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is 100% yes. I mean, I think that you're going through a narrative kind of change right now. So I think it's a way of pressuring people, not just to take profit, but other people to come out of position. So basically, you're hearing that Bitcoin's going to zero, Nasdaq is going to zero, everything has changed, AI is a bubble, all that kind of stuff. So what you do is you say all that, you get people to sell, and keep on panic selling. You buy it all, so the money's going to be waiting in the wings to do that. And then you change the narrative again. You say, no, it wasn't a bubble after all. It's really going higher and all this kind of stuff, right? So I think this is what you're seeing. You have to remember that at the end of the day, from a strategic point of view, if you look at the market as a whole, nothing stops money printing. Nothing stops the rise of assets. So, for example, is the US going to allow a recession to occur? 100% no. What will they do? They will absolutely print trillions, just like they did at COVID, just like they did in 2008. Whether it needs to be 8 or 10 or 6, or they will just print their way out of it. They will increase their budget deficits from 2 trillion to 4 to 6 to whatever it is. They will
36.
cut interest rates. Yeah, they will cut
the
interest
annual
rates.
budget deficit,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, they will cut the interest rates down to zero. So there is no way. The idea that basically we're teetering and we're going to go and recession and whatever is just
well, the big center of all of that then is a massive inflation continues.
Man, absolutely, 100%. There is no way. There is no this market or these economies are based on debt. The only way that you can keep them growing is basically take on more debt, because you certainly can't pay it back. None of them can. Not the US, not any part of Europe, not the UK. The only way they keep doing what they're doing, they keep trying to stay afloat, is by taking on more and more debt and kicking the can down the road.
Michelle, you said earlier when we were off air, there's nothing that you can tell traders at the moment that they're paying attention to. Does that mean that all of us need to sort of go away because the traders are just focused on liquidity and sentiment and debt and details about ship to ship transfers off the Straits of Malacca are just not relevant right now? What was your meaning of that? And just give us some insight as to where you think the market's at vis-a-vis real data, real insights versus large massive trends and sentiments like Omar's referencing.
Well, well, at the moment, it's no surprise we're just being buffeted by geopolitical events. I mean, on Friday, for example, we had the Iranians hijacked a Greek-owned tanker. Primarily, it looks as if it's a cargo dispute. But nevertheless, everybody is looking for, you know, what all of these signs mean. I was looking at oil on water, for example. There is definitely an increase of oil in water, and it stayed at those elevated record levels. And that's not just to do with geopolitics, it's to do with the fact that, you know, China and India have obviously looked for alternative sources of Iranian and of oil from Iran, and other than Iran and Russia. We've got extra OPEC plus barrels in the water. There's, you know, major disruption, uncertainty, and I think that is that's affecting narratives at the moment. This, you know, the surplus narrative, which is one I think that everyone's picked up on.
Are we seeing that surplus narrative in any tangible way? Because a lot of debate about, obviously now we're coming to the end of the year, it's never materialized. Is it hiding somewhere on the high seas, or what are the tanker rates? What are the ship floating oil on water tell us about this surplus? Is it there?
Well, when I look at oil on water, yes, it spiked up sharply in mid-October when, first of all, the UK announced the sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, the biggest producers of Russian oil, and then followed by the US a week later. And you can literally see it goes straight up. So yes, there is increased oil on water, but I think, you know, you've got the seasonal uplift that we usually see at this time of the year because refineries are producing more jet oil and heating oil.
When you say oil and water, I mean, on the Rosneft barrels in particular, were they mid-journey to a destination and then had to stop? Are they going slower, or is this oil and water actually going from point A to a point B? How does it get defined when you say oil on water in that regard, that some is sort of surplus and storage and some is actually on its way to a customer?
Well, it's a very inefficient logistics chain. And what's happening is that Russia has to transfer cargo. They're not going direct from point A to point B. They're going, say, they're being loaded, then they're going to a storage area, you know, off Soha, for example, or they're waiting outside port. In the case of some Russian fuel oil, for example, that's actually going around the Cape from Ust-Luga because Red Sea is still an issue, and those cargoes are being shipped on Greek tankers, and so therefore they're not prepared to take the risk. And also, you've seen record exports of Iranian oil, once again, highly inefficient. A lot of that is in floating storage off the archipelago in Malaysia. So I think it's a combination of a lot of factors, but there is definitely, you know, oil on water at 5-year highs.
Omar, where are we at on Iran? I mean, Michelle mentioned there the Iranian oil exports uninterrupted really since the war with Israel in June. And then this weekend we had sort of two events that sort of happened, that one sort of inserted certain sort of bookends the other. The Iran seizing a tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. Generally that gets put into the category, as Michelle even used the language, hijack, or is it just some commercial dispute? But ultimately it's seen in a nefarious way. And then the other story of Iran over the weekend, Iran's foreign minister saying that Iran is no longer enriching uranium at any site in the country, not even teeny weeny bits of it. Your thoughts on where Iran is sitting at this time in the context of its external place in the world?
So I think that first of all, Iran is largely undeterred. It's probably taking a period to consolidate and to reassess where its priorities lie. But I think there's nothing that's happened that suggests that there's no signal or nothing to convince it that some of the activities that it was supporting in the past are now, in some sense, terminally undesirable. What has changed is that it received a lot of support from countries in the Gulf and other ones in terms of its standoff with Israel diplomatically, and so that makes it at least have a motivation to be a more constructive neighbor, so as to continue to maintain a good the growing and improving relationship with the Gulf countries.
And would
However,
appear also the pressure from Washington has diffused quite significantly. Is that one to expect? Well, basically, because they've destroyed all of their nuclear enrichment capabilities, then Washington really isn't concerned at this time?
No, I think it's on the contrary. So I think that Iran is playing the long game, which is that they know that the US, despite its forays in August and in the 12-day war, is not interested in a long-term conflict. And it's, if you haven't heard about Iran, it's not because it's not happening. They've probably been smart enough to relocate it and do it in a more secret way now that they've purged whatever leaks, information leaks they were suffering from. And they know that they've got a much longer, they're much more patient than the US because they're in the region and the US is not in the region. And also the political pressure on Trump and the American administration not to get involved in wars is high. He was able to some extent, sell what he did in Iran over the summer as a one and done. It's going to be very difficult if he gets dragged into this on every 6 months. And also Iran knows that Israel is probably looking to pick a new fight with Iran because none of its objectives were realized. So probably it is just reorganizing itself internally, making sure there are no information leaks where there once were, and getting ready to begin ratcheting up pressure on the US and Iran and Israel once it's got its ducks in a row.
Let's go to the survey question and get some of our ducks in a row here. What deal will Trump agree with MBS for 2026 oil supply policy when they meet this week in Washington? Big meeting for many, many reasons, and all of the reporting ahead of the trip seems to indicate that it's been a relatively complicated negotiation as to what exactly would be agreed or announced, I suppose. Ultimately, will there be a security guarantee for Saudi Arabia like Qatar received recently? Would there be other investment agreements, or what exactly? Even the Crown Prince being in Washington is in some way a success for his profile in the world. But when it comes to oil, is oil on the table? Is oil on the menu between MBS and Trump? The US, Trump, the biggest oil producer in the world, MBS, the biggest oil exporter in the world. Will there be a deal there on the table or off the table that will be one has to consider? No OPEC cuts in 2026. Obviously, Trump is very happy with the fact that supply is increasing, oil prices are softened, and the price at the pump is keeping Americans happy. That would be his narrative, you would think. Or would there be a permission for OPEC Plus to defend $60 Brent, which they've had they've nearly had to do once or twice this year, but we've come back. Will Trump will commit to, or will he communicate that this time he's serious about enforcing Russian sanctions, or will that just be, the Russian sanctions drift into the long grass like the Iranian sanctions have? Or no deal on oil supply at all? That's just a ruse and isn't something that these two gentlemen will be negotiating or will be agreeing on. What are your thoughts? Trump, MBS, and oil supply. Do they put any of these, most likely off the table? We'll never hear about it, but do you expect, some people say that the OPEC Plus cuts this year are the gift to Donald Trump from Saudi Arabia. Some say not. So what is your thoughts? Which of these do you think meets the deal of the day? Omar Najia, do you care whatsoever, or should we care that the IEA did a complete U-turn last week on its long-term forecast for peak oil demand?
Well, I mean, you can always, how can I put this? So you can, when something becomes so ridiculously obvious to everybody, to keep a little bit of credibility, then, you have to stop your kind of delusions and step into the real world. I mean, this kind of narrative that, green is going to save us when it miserably failed during COVID, that, you can just use wind. And I mean, the problem is AI needs so much energy, so much electricity. the entire world is basically going to digitize, and copper prices are rocketing, and to say that energy really is going to peak and we're going to zero and forget about it and it's no longer important and all this kind of stuff. Look at what happened to Germany. Germany basically has gone belly up because of energy prices. So they had to say what they did, because it's patently, delusional not to. So I don't think people kind of, paid much attention to what they were saying before. And again, they're the same people who said, $50 Brent in Q1 and horizon and just over the horizon and just coming now and here we go and it's going to happen and, et cetera, et cetera.
Michelle, the other sort of big unknown for the markets, I think, at the moment, we talked about it earlier, that the scale of which Russian oil supply to the world will be disrupted. Will the Americans get very serious about enforcement on the customer end, India, China, or the supply end coming out of the Baltics and the North Sea? But what does seem to be quite solidly predictable, at least for another horrible winter, is that the war between Russia's war and Ukraine is ongoing and is becoming quite serious for energy infrastructure in that region, as well as the drones that seem to be disrupting European airports and so forth. What's the look of things in the Baltic region from the point of view of getting greater and greater caught up in this sort of proxy conflict between Russia and Ukraine?
That's an interesting question, because I was only in Finland last week talking to people in the industry about what their expectations are for winter. And there is major concern about the fact that about these tankers and their condition coming into these waters, very icy conditions, and amazement was being expressed at the fact that there hasn't been an accident yet or some sort of casualty. So I think in the Baltic there's that concern. And also I think that Russian oil is going to get darker. They're going to borrow the Iranian playbook. So that means more spoofing of vessels' locations. So we're already seeing that for liquefied petroleum gas trades in Ust-Luga. Many of the tankers there are manipulating their locations, so you can't see them, loading there. And I think that's going to be happening. There's more GPS jamming in the region because Russia is obviously trying to protect their refineries from drone attacks, so they're disrupting navigation. There was a mass spoofing event there on November 2nd in the Baltic, in which hundreds, if not thousands, of AIS ships, magically appeared for half an hour. Again, serious disruption and potential navigational issues. So my conclusion is that it's going to be heightened risk, increased deceptive shipping practices, and a step up in attacks on refineries. We had one at Novorossiysk in the Black Sea recently, and I think we're going to have more of the same coming into winter.
And Omar, similarly in this region, where is the Israel occupation, traumatic enforcement of brutal military power in Gaza? There's supposedly some kind of ceasefire going on. How is the region looking at that now, and how does it sort of evolve, do you think, towards into the end of the year and the new year?
Well, I think that although we're some way from what would satisfy the standard definition of a ceasefire, there is definitely a de-escalation compared to what was going on, say, at the beginning of the year, a few months ago. And I would also say that the volume of aid entering is significantly higher than it was, although still not at the desired level. But I guess from neutral countries in the region that are most interested in avoiding regional instability, what's happening now is probably satisfactory as a temporary situation. But I'm sure you saw reports about the US plans, perhaps for a divided Gaza, that came out this week. And so everyone's really waiting for what the long-term plan is and how it's going to be enforced. and all the issues regarding a potential, international military force being present, and for those plans to materialize before passing final judgment. But at least in the short term, Israel has been significantly reined in, even if many Palestinians continue to live a very difficult life and struggle to get the basic necessities of life.
Just on that point, Omar, I mean, this is a window, we've talked about it earlier, that the de facto, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, is this long expected visit to Washington this week. And so certain conditions had to be in place in order for that to be even possible. He could not be going to Washington if we were seeing a raging genocide continue in Gaza. So my question to you is, how much of these things do you think are choreographed so that these events can happen and then maybe drift away from them after the sort of Washington week? How big do you see this week vis-a-vis those kinds of issues?
So I think it's, first of all, Trump has had a tough time of it domestically in the US. And one of the advantages of meeting with the Gulf countries during these difficult domestic times is that it often offers him the opportunity to declare huge multi-trillion-dollar investment deals. Not sure how accurate they are, but they are certainly a PR coup if nothing else. And at the same time, he's got the Israeli lobby, which has significant influence in America, and he will be looking to convince them that he is, moving Saudi Arabia closer to the normalization that they covered. So I think that it comes at this time actually more to help him, sidestep some of the domestic problems he's facing and distract them with the pomp and glamour and razzle dazzle of the visit of someone as prominent as Prince Mohammed bin Salman. In terms of the timing with what's going on in the Middle East, I think to be honest, it's so hard to calibrate because these things have to be planned sometime in advance. And given the way that multiple countries in the Middle East are behaving, it would be very difficult to time it in the way that you intimated, because people don't do as they're told as much as they would like.
Yes. Well, we have to do what we're told and get back to work. It is no deal on oil supply getting the most votes in this room. I think it's a week worth following in Washington always, when the first time in 6 or 7 years that the leadership of Saudi Arabia is in Washington. What comes out of it? How does it tell us about the future of a lot of these threads? I think will be useful. Michelle Weiss-Bachmann, thank you so much. As always, great to have you on. Omar Obeidly in Bahrain and Omar Najia here in Dubai. Thank you guys. Monday morning kicks off well when you're on with us. Thank you so much. Have a great week, everybody. All the best.
Thanks, Sean.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.